بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, we have the great honor of hosting an incredible panel this afternoon and this evening, this afternoon. Alhamdulillah, we'll introduce them subsequently, but as is our tradition here at MANA and with other Muslim organizations, we'd like to start the program with the recitation of Quran. The recitation will be from our dear brother, trustworthy, reliable brother, Yasir Qadhi. He's the only qari. We can give him 10 minutes notice and he'll respond. So may Allah Ta'ala bless him. He has wonderful projects involved with teaching both the proper recitation of the Quran and understanding the Quran. So check those out. And without further ado, our dear brother Qari Yasir Qadhi. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولنبلونكم بشيء من الخوف والجوع ونقص من الأموال والأنفس والثمرات وبشر الصابرين الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة قالوا إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. أولئك عليهم صلوات من ربهم ورحمة وأولئك هم المهتدون. And we will surely test you with something of fear and hunger and the loss of wealth and lives and fruits, but give good tidings to the patient, who when disaster strikes them, they say, indeed, we belong to Allah, and indeed, to Him we will return. Those are the ones upon whom are blessings from their Lord and mercy, and it is those who are the rightly guided. صدق الله مولانا العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Allah has spoken the truth. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, as you all know, if you responded to the flyer and the title of the program, September 11th, 2001 was one of those great watersheds, not just in American history, but in world history. And without belaboring ourselves to determine who was behind this, what elements were in play, though that's a discussion for another day and another panel. What we'd like to examine today, brothers and sisters, is how did this event impact the American Muslim community? And I could think of no better collection of representatives of that community to discuss this than the panel we have today. We're going to do something a little bit different. Usually we will scour the internet searching for tidbits of biographical gems to introduce panelists, but we're going to let each and every one of them introduce themselves and let you know what they think you need to know about themselves before they proceed to their presentations. So to discuss this issue, we have Dr. Nisa Muhammad, we have Dr. Yasir Qadhi, we have Imam Safiya Rabb from Baltimore, Maryland. We have Imam Magid, and we have Dr. Sherman Jackson. And so from their various perspectives, all of them with a very rich and deep relationship with this community here in North America, all of them loving this community that they've so dutifully served, not just for years, but for decades. And I know Dr. Yasser is probably feeling a little old with me saying that, but al-haqqu yuqal, they've literally been serving this community for decades. There's over a century of service to our community on this panel. And not just the service hasn't just been related to duration. That service has also been related to a wide array of constituent communities in the overall American Muslim community. And so without further ado, and any comments I have, I'll intersperse those with the panelists during the discussion. So we're going to get right to it, and we're going to ask our first presenter. The format we'll follow is each presenter will have 15 minutes to say, to give us their thoughts and reflections. And that's a little longer than is usually allotted for a panel of this size, but we really want to be able to benefit from their years and decades of experience, from their insight, from the various perspectives that they bring to the panel. And so we want them to have a little bit of time to really share something with us that's significant. Then we'll have a discussion with the panelists, moderated discussion. I will moderate that discussion for 20-25 minutes. Then we'll entertain any questions and comments, not just questions. We encourage everyone who's viewing via Facebook or YouTube to contribute comments relevant to the topic and relevant to how this has impacted us and how we can be move beyond the more negative impacts, and not who did it. Was it Mossad, the CIA? How did bin Laden get operatives in the building to orchestrate a controlled demolition? We're not looking at that. We're looking at what happened, regardless of who's responsible. How did it impact our community, and how can we move forward? So without further ado, we'll ask Imam Mohamed Magid to kick us off and give us 15 minutes of deep insight. He'll tell you a little about himself, but I will say this. For a long time, Imam Magid has been doing an exemplary job in leading the Adams Center in Northern Virginia. And I'll leave it at that and let him go further if he chooses. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much, Imam Zaid, for inviting us, and Imana for putting this together and have me to share this webinar with wonderful brothers and sisters from the leadership of the Muslim community. I just want to say that in the Muslim community in Adams Center in Virginia, when the tragedy of 9/11 have taken place, we receive kind of hate response, backlash in our masjid, and people have came and written in our walls, kind of attack on us, blaming us for what have happened in 9/11. And as a result, we have suspended the school that day, the next day. And then the newspaper have written about what happened to our community. And the community, Jewish community, Christian community, Sikh community, Hindu community have showed up in our masjid. And the Christians and the Jewish and Sikh community, all of them came to reaffirm that they will not accept bigotry and hate, toward Muslims, and welcoming Muslim to the community, and they offer even give donation to repaint the building. And a year after that, they spent the whole night in our parking lot to show that they will not accept hatred, attack, and bigotry against the Muslim community. And I would like to say that the impact of this tragedy at that time that led to the Muslim women to go into group for shopping and so forth at the time. And since that time, there's so many things have taken place, in the communities. And unfortunately, there's good things like interfaith community responding, but also there's horrible things happened. The raiding of Muslim organization in Virginia, for example, false, accusation of many organizations being raided, and nothing came out of it. An issue of terrorism, and the bullying of Muslim kids in schools. And we have refugees that came from Afghanistan, come from Iraq, as a result of the two large wars that thousands of people have died because of that. But one of the things that have touched me the most, that we have a young man and a young lady from my community who were newlywed, the Chowdhury family. They were in one of the towers, and tragically they were killed among the other victims of 9/11. And year later, they, about 3 years, I think, they found some ashes that can be identified as their ashes. And the family asked me to come to preside over their funeral in New York. This is a very wonderful family. Those newlywed, they had, dream like anyone else, to establish a family. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring comfort to this family. Every year they go through this remembrance. But also I just want to say that the solidarity they get from not only the Muslim community, but from the larger community is something that really bring comfort to me, to see that people cared about them, and shared with them at least the feeling of lost. You cannot be in someone's shoes, losing the man lost his daughter and his son-in-law in this tragic event and terrorist attack. Now, it's very important for all of us also to realize that this led to so many other things, that Muslims being accused, children being bullied in the schools. And sometimes when you talk to Muslim kids in school, every time 9/11 comes around, they've been bullied and being called names. Some of these children, they were not there. They were not born when 9/11 have taken place. But they find themselves answering and responding to a tragedy that took place 20 years ago. They're still bearing the burden of it years to come. And then they asked them to condemn terrorism and so forth, as if they are responsible of that tragedy, the tragedy of 9/11. And therefore, as Muslims, we have a clear position against use of violence taking innocent people's life. We have a verse from the Quran that says, all of you know, whoever have taken one life as if have taken life of all humanity, and whoever saved one life as if have saved the life of all humanity. Therefore, we don't have to keep repeating this, because this really impact the psychology and the emotional state of our children. They feel that they have to defend themselves every time the subject have come up. I want to just to say today at the Adam Center, it is a national day of service that the Jewish and the Christian community and the Muslim community, they're collecting hygienes, toiletries, kits, and so forth for the Afghan community who came to our area. We created a committee to welcome the Afghani community, the refugees, and the interfaith community, an organization that I'm part of. It's called Multi-Faith Network Neighborhood nationwide. They're doing this now of welcoming the refugees, whether in Virginia, whether in Texas, or any part of the United States. The last things I want to say that so they can give a chance for other people to speak, that it is very important for all of us that to encourage our children to report any kind of bullying in the school, and not to shy away from reporting that, because we will not be able to stop the wrongdoing if our children are shy away from reporting it. And therefore we should encourage them. We should make that in our khutbahs and in our talks every time any anniversary of 9/11 comes in, or any kind of tragedy takes place in the part of the world, and Islam becomes the subject and the topic that on the news. We have to empower our children in public school, especially those who go to public school, to speak up, come to report to us, and we should advocate for them and talk to our public school about the mistreatment of Muslim children. I want to stop here. Thank you so much for including me in this webinar today.
Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khair. We thank you so much for sharing some very personal and touching experiences, Imam Magid. May Allah reward you. And we'd like to also just add, since Imam Magid didn't add anything to the couple line introduction I gave to that, Imam Magid has consistently been, despite the administration prevailing in Washington, D.C., he has consistently been a representative for the Muslim community, oftentimes doing very necessary but unappreciated work. So we thank Imam Magid for doing that. And he knows all too well just how unappreciated it can be sometimes. But Allah Ta'ala chooses those who can bear the consequences of the responsibility that Allah places on their shoulders. And in Imam Magid, he's placed that particular responsibility on some very broad shoulders. We'd like to move on to our second presenter, and that's Dr. Imam Sheikh Habib Yasir Qadhi. I've known Sheikh Yasir for a long time. We sometimes like ships passing in the night. I was leaving New Haven, and he was coming in to do his PhD at Yale University. But despite that and other near misses, we've been able to stay in touch over the decades. And he's always been someone who has never shied away from doing the unpopular thing nor the uncomfortable thing. And that takes a lot of courage. And so we commend him for that. If he'd like to add anything biographically, he's a very studious, scholarly person. If Ashir didn't show up, we could have asked Sheikh Yasir to recite the Quran. He's also a Qari and Hafiz, amongst many other accolades, titles, and accomplishments. So may Allah Ta'ala preserve him for this community. And Imam Magid yielded 4 minutes of his time to you, Dr. Yasir.
Astaghfirullah. Inshallah, jazakallah khair. Bismillah ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. We begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one and the unique. It is He alone that we worship, and it is His blessings that we seek. He is the Lord of the oppressed, and He answers the call of the weak. Alhamdulillah, I don't really have any biographical information to add. I am al-abd al-mudhnib al-faqir. I am somebody whom Allah has blessed to conceal his sins from the eyes of the people. And so because of that, they have assumed about me things that I'm not worthy of. And so I ask Allah to forgive me for their assumptions and to keep all of us straight and guided and to protect our sins and faults. And it's it's a big honor for me to be amongst such giants and luminaries. I believe that I'm the youngest speaker, and this shows the husn dhan that you have in me. I'm not qualified to be amongst people that are senior to me in ilm and wisdom and age, because I keep on saying that actual knowledge isn't just book knowledge, it is also wisdom. And wisdom is not something you learn from reading. It comes from life experiences. And I keep on telling our youngsters that they need to respect our elders, even if some of them might think they have more book knowledge. They can quote other things, but our elders have the wisdom that comes from years of experience in life and from events like 9/11. And so this leads me segue straight into the topic here. That, subhanAllah, it really is difficult to imagine 20 years have gone by since that tragedy. As they say, the entire world changed. And I was actually in the first year of my master's program in Saudi Arabia in Medina. I was actually in Medina. I had just come back the week before. And subhanAllah, it was Allah's qadr, because if I hadn't been on that flight, I would have been stuck in America for at least half a year, because the flights were canceled, especially Saudi Arabia. So Allah's qadr, I had to return to Medina, and literally was my first semester of the master's program, and I saw the Twin Towers fall in my neighbor's TV. I didn't even have a TV back then in Medina, and literally everything, as they say, changed. But let's jump straight to the topic at hand here. Us Muslims, obviously, we are very familiar with the reaction to 9/11, with the Islamophobia, with the utilization of our religion in presidential campaigns, with the demonization of the ummah, of our texts, of even our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Everybody is familiar with the false invasions that took place, the trillions of dollars that were spent, the hundreds of thousands of lives, perhaps even millions of lives that were lost as a result of the tragedies that were perpetrated as a defense mechanism of 9/11. We're also, of course, very familiar with the immediate backlash that happened upon us and our families, and the difficulties that all of us have. And Imam Zaid, you referenced this, obliquely, if you like, indirectly in your own muqaddimah, where there are things that we can't even say, and even the political facts, many of us find it awkward to mention, because when we talk about those facts, when we talk about the lives lost and the trillions spent, it is as if it is perceived that we are, a'udhu billah, we seek Allah's refuge, justifying or even sympathizing with the tragedies of 9/11. But I posted this flyer on my Facebook page, and alhamdulillah, I have millions of people following. And somebody from Afghanistan posted, and it's on my page, you can look at it right now. Somebody from Afghanistan posted as a response to this flyer about this event, and he said, for us, we don't really think of 9/11 as one tragedy. For us, every day for the last 25 years has been a 9/11. That's what he posted. And it's something that we all understand as the Muslim community. But when we try to express those sentiments, when we try to contextualize the after effects, much less the precursors to 9/11, it becomes very dangerous territory. And many of us, perhaps understandably, shy away from talking about the political realities of that event, the precursors to and the after effects of that particular event. And my particular position is that, perhaps it is wise that the religious clergy do not become the Noam Chomskys of the ummah, because can you imagine if Imam Zaid were to espouse the radical views of Chomsky? Can you imagine a religious figure becoming somebody that's spouting forth that type of rhetoric? Frankly, we worry that perhaps Imam Zaid would literally go down the route of Malcolm X in his ending, because the world cannot take such truths. As the famous line goes in that movie, you can't handle the truth. So even if sheikhs and imams and clerics have to speak obliquely, as I am doing right now, as Imam Zaid did at the beginning, the least that we can do is to make sure our communities are aware of these ideas, of the context, of the precursors, of the after effects. Even if I cannot speak directly about that because it's perhaps not wise. And by the way, wisdom is a part of our sharia. It is a part of our sunnah to be wise in who says what. Sometimes the messenger, and I mean messenger by small m, sometimes the messenger does ruin the message because of who that messenger is. And so perhaps the messenger himself shouldn't speak the message, but should facilitate others to speak the message. And we see this even with the messenger, capital M, himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he sometimes chose not to do things that were right to do. For example, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah and the famous incident. Even before this in Mecca, when Utbah ibn Rabi'ah came and challenged him at the beginning of the da'wah and said to him that, Ya Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, your message, who do you think you are to preach it? And then he asked the question, أَأَنْتَ خَيْرٌ أَمْ عَبْدُ الْمُطَّلِبِ? Do you think you're better than Abdul Muttalib? Do you think you are wiser and more knowledgeable than your grandfather Abdul Muttalib? And this question to our ears is heretical. Are you out of your minds? You're comparing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to somebody who was not a pure Muslim, even if he might have been a Hanif. He was not a person upon Tawheed and Aqeedah. He was not a messenger for sure. Are you out of your mind to ask the question? But in Jahili society, in pre-Islamic Arabia, there is no question that Abdul Muttalib is the legend. And so there is no comparison. And our Prophet ﷺ could have answered, of course I'm better. And every one of us would have cheered at that answer. But you see, that is where prophetic wisdom comes in, which teaches us that perhaps not every messenger, small m, needs to be the messenger of every single fact. At that very difficult question, our Prophet ﷺ chose to be silent and did not respond to that question. Because for him to say the truth at that point in time would have actually harmed the bigger message that he's preaching. So my point here, as I began, I fully sympathize with Imam Zaid's indirect references, and I also endorse those indirect references and the political context, and we're simply going to jump over all of that because sometimes the religious clergy, those that are already in trouble for other things and for other stances, whether it's their morality issues or whether it's their other issues that are unpopular to society, perhaps they shouldn't be the most active political activists. And so we say very clearly, 9/11 and the event that happened on it was indeed a tragedy. It was un-Islamic. It was unethical. It was unjust. Regardless of whatever political grievances that existed before, that action was unjustified. And regardless of how much injustice exponentially was caused as a result of that injustice, it was all wrong. And let's just leave it at that before I move on to my next points. And that is that we firmly believe as Muslims that there's no such thing as pure evil, that out of evil sometimes some positives can occur as well. And that's what makes us believers. We find optimism, we find the light at the end of the tunnel. We firmly believe that even when a negative incident happens, that we gain from it and we benefit from it and we look at that positive. And so when we look back at the last 20 years, let me summarize in 3 simple points what I feel as somebody who was active in da'wah. I just became active, in the mid-90s, a few years before, not as much as everybody else on this call who definitely has many more decades pre-9/11. My first khutbah was 1993, 94. And I was giving lectures and talks throughout the 90s. And so I just caught that era, adrakti, that era. But of course, it was 9/11 that changed the course for all of us. So I was active pre and of course post. So looking at those last 25 years of my own da'wah activities, my personal reflection summarized in 3 points, and then inshallah I'll hand the mic back. First and foremost, some of the things that I believe the ummah really changed after 9/11. Number one, the intellectual maturation of the American Muslim leadership. Tragedies actually force you to become mature and strong. Just like the orphan loses both parents, just like the Prophet ﷺ became an orphan. There's a divine wisdom in that orphanage. There's in that orphaning of that child. There's a divine wisdom. If you wanted to become who you were to become, Ya Rasulullah, you needed to go through tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. And so just like the orphan loses the parents and we feel sad and sorry, yet it is that orphan that rises from the ashes and becomes Rasulullah and Khatam al-Anbiya wal Mursaleen. So that tragedy forces anybody to mature up and to think critically. And specifically, our Muslim community matured in many, many, many ways, far more than I can have even time to go over, and maybe even things I haven't even thought about. I mean, off the top of my head, first and foremost, our identities. I remember clearly, as the son of immigrants, as born and raised in this country, I remember clearly that we had to make a decision post 9/11. Am I really American or not? And to me, and one of the effects of 9/11 personally is that I was in Saudi Arabia. I was set to become the first American to do a PhD from the University of Medina ever in its history. I was on track to do that. The first Westerner actually to do a PhD. 9/11 was actually so personal to me. And I say this very frankly, I never felt more of an affinity for my people of this land, for the country I was born and raised in. I never felt a greater affinity right after that day, because I realized my future is not over here in a land far, far away. Even if it's the holy city of Medina, my future is here amongst my people, amongst the language I speak and the culture I'm born with. And so that caused me to finish up my master's, submit my dissertation. The day I submitted the dissertation, I told my advisor and my faculty, I'm going back to America. And they were shocked. But that's the reason. 9/11 was my personal motivation for me to leave that track and then come back to the States and do my PhD over here. The point is that many of us, quote unquote, children of immigrants, we realize we might be children of immigrants, but we are a part of this land. And to me, that is very important. That psychological framework, that shift of taking ownership of this is our land. We're not going anywhere. We're not. And even if it's for better or for worse, the fact that we're planting our flags here, metaphorically and physically, and we're realizing this is what is at stake here. It's a shift of a mindset that did not exist pre 9/11. As well, that maturation I'm talking about, we realize that we're all in this together. We realize that regardless of the sectarian differences that were rampant in the 90s, anybody who was active in the 90s is well aware of the Sufi Salafi divide, or of this and that divide, or of the HT and the Deobandi. All of these were very demarcated factions of Islam. Post 9/11, many of us had a wake-up call, and Imam Zaid is a testimony to this. Even if some of us were active in some, interpretation of Islam, we tried our best to minimize those differences. We worked to build bridges. In fact, 10 years ago, Imam Zaid, you and I, and Imam Magid were on United for Change platform that was expressly meant to bring together different, strands of Islam and different strands that would not have happened pre 9/11. And so 9/11 caused many of us to understand that we are one ummah, and we need to work not just interfaith, but intra-faith, and also intercultural as well. And obviously, a lot still has to be done. But again, let's be frank here. Compared to the 80s and 90s and what my father tells me of the 70s, compared to that era, there is no question that we are far more understanding of our ethnic divide and differences. And a lot of work is being done between the quote-unquote suburban masajid and the inner city masajid. Yes, a lot more still has to be done. We're far from perfect. But the thing is, both sides, both of these masajid understand the need and the pros and cons of coming together. And there is a much greater understanding that there needs to be, there are talents on both sides and there are resources on both sides. And so there's active cooperation, dare I say, in most American cities. Of course, a lot more has to be done. But let's go back to the 90s when there was a silent wall. Let's be honest again. There was that division between the inner city and between the suburban masajid. And we're now working to make sure that those divisions are minimized. Also, by the way, the issue of political activism, and that's a very key point of post 9/11 that I think as well. I mean, again, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and during that time frame, the norm was to hear this notion of voting is haram. It was the default in most suburban masajid. And our imams and sheikhs from Al-Azhar and from other places, there was this identity of, we shouldn't really get involved in the system too much. All of this changed post 9/11 because we realized if we wanted to impact the community, if we wanted to protect our civil rights, there is no way to do so other than to get involved in the political process. You never really hear, it's not mainstream at all anymore to hear this notion of voting is haram. That's literally out the window. Those folks, I'm sure they're around somewhere, but I mean, that notion is pretty much thrown out the window. Forget voting is haram. The question now comes, okay, which is the lesser of the two evil candidates and whatnot? So it's a different level of dynamics, and we're still maturing, but we are maturing way faster than any other community. So my point being, again, so much can be said, but I want to give it back to our esteemed elders and seniors. But I think we also need to look at where our future lies in this very difficult time and scenario. And alhamdulillah, yes, there's a lot to be worried about, but alhamdulillah, on many fronts the future is very, very bright. There's an increased awareness of our Islamic identity, of our American heritage, if you like, the fact that this is our land and country. There is a sense of maturity and wisdom about the notion of we need to get involved in civic issues and social issues. Again, a lot can be done, but let's be honest, in the 90s, you didn't have this notion of activism and of being socially productive in your community. It really wasn't there. You didn't have Muslim clerics and leaders, by and large. Obviously, there are exceptions to this rule, but generally speaking, you did not have this awareness of Islam being more than just rituals and theology. Rather, it is also a faith that must contribute to the lands that it's living in. So there has been a lot of positives that have come from within our community, and inshallah a lot more to look forward to. And with that, inshallah, I'll hand it back to our esteemed guests and speakers. Wa jazakumullahu khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Yasir. One thing you said made me reflect on where I was on 9/11. I was in Syria, locked inside of a masjid studying for exams, because many of the masjids, they lock up between prayers. So I just told Imam, lock me in, no one will bother me, and not even my wife. I think she's online, so if the screen goes black, just you understand what happened. And so the neighborhood kids, they start banging on the doors, Sheikh Zaid, Sheikh Zaid. They blew up the Sears Tower and the World Trade Center, and that man, the list was long. You got to come outside. Say, go get the imam. And he unlocked it. I never once used, our apartment had a satellite hookup. I never once used it until that day.
Mm-hmm.
And I woke up and whoever it was on CNN was talking to Tom Clancy. And Tom Clancy. He said, Tom, is this life imitating art? Because he wrote a novel. Yeah. So that's where I was. And I also had that epiphany in terms of belonging. I would say an extremely anti-American person. Mm-hmm. And the first thing I thought was like the community, they need us. And we need to say something intelligent. I know I wrote something to see how you guys should do A, B, C, and D. And a lot of people said they appreciated that, but this isn't about me, it's about you guys. So let me move on to Dr. Nisa Muhammad. Dr. Nisa Muhammad is at Howard University. I hesitate to call her the Muslim chaplain there. She does so more than that. But one of the things that I think really makes her very well suited for a program that's being sponsored by MANA and the inner city African American community that we want to serve. We're doing our best community. Is that she's very involved with the MSA, not just at Howard, but in all of the historical Black schools and colleges, and trying to really mobilize them into an effective force. And she's also instrumental in an initiative to help introduce proper Islamic worship and theological foundations to the Nation of Islam. So she has those distinctions, and so she's out on the front lines, many different lines. So we really, and she's been featured on PBS and major media, so it's a great honor for us to have her on this MANA program. So without further ado, we bring you Dr. Nisa Mohammed.
Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. So thank you, Dr. Imam Zaid, you're very kind. I am Dr. Nisa Muhammad. I'm the Assistant Dean for Religious Life at Howard University, and I want to thank Imam Zaid and the MANA community for giving me this opportunity to share my reflections. I do have the awesome opportunity to work with the amazing students at Howard University, and it's interesting that we had a tribute yesterday to 9/11, and our students spoke about the world that they were born into, because of course they were not born at the time of 9/11, and they talked about the world that they were born into. I'm going to share a little bit of reflection about the world as they see it now, the world that they were born into, and as well we remember the tragedy of 9/11 and the lives of so many that were lost. as a country remembers, I want us to also remember, or not to forget, the world that young people live in today that is so very different as a result of 9/11. And so this is the world of that the Howard University students talked about. And I want us to ask ourselves, why would Allah allow this? What are we to learn about this? And so for Muslims, the pain of 9/11 was very immense. And so as author Ralph Ellison explains in his essay on being the target of discrimination, first, something happens to us, and then just wait, it happens to every other group in America. Black people have been the historical center and focus of white supremacy since we landed on these shores. 9/11 welcomed immigrant Muslims to this esteemed group. To make matters worse, the entire faith of Islam was blamed for the actions of a few. This was unheard of when the Ku Klux Klan terrorized Black people in America. The entire faith of Christianity was never condemned nor criticized. Christians were never asked to constantly repudiate the Ku Klux Klan after every attack. Christians were never asked if they supported the Ku Klux Klan, and where in their faith did it allow for church bombings, crosses on front lawns, and lynchings. Immigrant Muslims came to America for the American dream. It became an American nightmare, and many Americans turned friendship into hatred and made their home countries, people's home countries, targets for drone strikes, killing innocent women and children, all in the name of the war on terror. Our young people today are the victims of a scared Congress that rushed through the Patriot Act. And it gave the government unbeknownst powers never before for record searches, secret searches, intelligence searches. And this is the world that we see now that has mass surveillance, indefinite detentions at Guantanamo, religious discrimination, stop and frisk, governmental policies of torture, and as I mentioned, targeted drone strikes. And so this type of overreach by the government is exactly why the 13 colonies revolted from England. They wanted a declaration of independence to be free from this type of overlording. However, the government, through the media, has convinced us through the trope of national security and the war on terror that we have to relinquish our personal liberties in order for us to be safe. But the colonists didn't believe that in the 1770s when Benjamin Franklin said, "Those who will sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither." Terry Albury is a perfect example of the Patriot Act gone very, very wrong. He was so disillusioned by what he was forced to do as an FBI counterintelligence agency in the so called war on terror that he was willing to leak government documents to the press and go to jail when he was caught. He leaked documents to the press, but he never gave the name of the reporter. He never gave the name of the media that he sent them to. However, the dates in his plea agreement coincide with the series of articles that The Intercept did that they published, and they detail how the FBI surveils informants and suspected terrorists. So he detailed everything that he knew about the FBI's counterterrorism policies and the near unlimited power of the federal government to dig into anyone's life. Let me repeat this again. The near unlimited power of the federal government to dig into anyone's life. This is after 9/11. So day in and day out, Mr. Albury confronted Muslims and terrorized them under the guise of surveillance. He would knock on their doors, requesting to interview them. He would follow them, he would harass them, and according to a sentencing memo filed by Mr. Albury's attorneys, this was an everyday encounter for Mr. Albury. He comported himself in this setting as a model FBI agent. But the conflict and depression generated by this routine but soul destroying events took its toll. When it got to be too much for Mr. Albury, he sent at least 25 documents, 16 of which were classified according to court documents, to the press. And here's what Mr. Albury said. I did it because it got to the point where the reality of what I was a part of hit me in a way that just shattered my existence. There is this mythology surrounding the war on terrorism and the FBI that has given agents the power to ruin the lives of completely innocent people based solely on what part of the world they come from or what religion they practice or the color of their skin. And I did that. I helped destroy people for 17 years. I apologize to everyone I have hurt as a result of my actions, especially my family, my co-workers in California and Minnesota, and my colleagues in the law enforcement community. That is what Mr. Albury wrote in a letter to the court. He was sentenced to 48 years in prison in 2018. So for years, Muslims and Blacks complained. We know people who felt that they were terrorized, they were harassed. We have complained over and over again that we knew this was happening to us. Few people listened. We knew this was happening, that we were being surveilled because of our race, because of our religion, because we were organizing against that, because we were being terrorized. And people thought, oh, you're just making this up. But the FBI has been doing this. And it wasn't until one of their own, one of our own, who could not take it any longer, said, enough is enough. His conscience spoke out. But what are you supposed to do as a person of conscience when you see what your country is doing? 20 years after the first detainees arrived at Guantanamo Bay Detention Center in Cuba, the United States is still holding 40 detainees indefinitely, most without charge and none having received a fair trial. My students ask me, why? Why is this happening? What did they do? What happened to fair trial in America? Why is this happening? Why is Allah allowing this to happen? What are we supposed to learn? Mohamedou Salahi details in his imprisonment, after 9/11 happened, I was kidnapped from Mauritania to Jordan and from there to Afghanistan, from there to Guantanamo Bay, where I was tortured. I stayed there for 15 years and was released in 2016. I was never convicted or charged with any crimes. Muslim dictators rounded up so many young men just because of suspicion. I understand suspicion, but I don't understand kidnapping and torture. The U.S. twisted the arms of the leaders of so many countries, but we expected better from the U.S. There is a long list of young and old, but primarily young Muslims who were preemptively prosecuted by the fear of the American government. Mohammed Hussein, a respected member of his community, was targeted in a fictional FBI sting in 2004. He was convicted of material support for terrorism in 2006 and sentenced to 15 years. He was subjected to preemptive prosecution, which is a law enforcement strategy to target and prosecute individuals or organizations whose beliefs, ideology, or religious affiliations raise security concerns for the government. Just in case targets might become terrorists, the government concocts a sting. He was finally released in 2020 and returned to his community. And so, to conclude, this is a new world young people were welcomed to after 9/11. This event was a great tragedy. There was tremendous loss of life and tremendous loss of civil liberties. As we remember the tragic loss of 9/11, please don't forget the mass surveillance, the Quran apps you thought were just to tell which way to pray, but instead were recording your data, the religious discrimination that continues today with a broad brush, governmental policies of torture and targeted drone killings, the latest one in Afghanistan that supposedly targeted the Taliban, but we've just learned today that in fact they hit an aid worker and killed innocent people. Don't forget the lives lost at war for nothing. Don't forget the Sikhs that were harassed because people thought they were Muslims, and we have to ask ourselves again and again, why did Allah allow this to happen? It is a test for the believers. Has it brought us closer? What have we learned? Are we better Muslims on the other side of this? Do we see each other in a different light? Has it in fact brought us closer? What are we to learn? Allah, please help us and guide us into a better understanding. Assalamu alaikum, rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You're on mute, Imam Zaid. We can't hear you.
How about now?
Yes.
Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khair, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We thank you, Dr. Nisa, for the view from 30,000 feet. It's interesting, Imam Magid, he started down in the weeds, like what's happening to families and individuals, and now you've taken it out to the big picture and how in a larger way it affected us. So really appreciate that perspective, and may Allah continue to bless you.
Ameen.
What you do on the many fronts, you do it on.
Ameen.
Now we move to our dear brother, Imam Safiya Rabb. By way of introduction, it would be sufficient to say he's Dr. Nisa Rabb's brother. But we're not going to do that to him because he has his own impact that's tremendous there in the city of Baltimore. He's been working, reforming, organizing, mobilizing, building, constructing, serving at many different levels, and he made an attempt to serve at the big level with the Iran at Congress. Unfortunately, the people weren't wise enough to choose him. They prefer the status quo of billions of dollars coming into Baltimore and relatively little to show for it. He was going to turn that around, and I asked him would he give it another shot. He said no at the time, but I hope that he reflects on it so that he can bring some of the integrity that he's brought to all of his work on, again, many different fronts, religiously, politically, economically. He's an entrepreneur. He's an international business person. He's a bad man. So without further ado, I turn the mic over to our dear brother, Saafir Rabb.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. With Allah's name, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer. That Imam Zaid is something else. I wish I could still see him, but the way this is set up, I can't see him any longer. But any there he is. Any integrity that I hold is for sure coming from that which was before me and Sheikh Yasir Qadhi. He mentioned he was the youngest. That's not true. We have to correct things. I'm the youngest. I looked it up. And he too is one who's come before me. And I am overwhelmed and honored to get to share this space, even if virtually, because I love each and every one of the people on this transmission and have learned from them, and they've shaped me and been stalwart examples of human integrity. And it's an honor to know you all and to have been influenced and shaped by each of you. So that stated, I'll attempt to give, I guess, a medium version, if that was the big picture and the middle picture, and also give a little bit of a broad introduction of myself in terms of a community. I'm speaking to this audience and to the panel with specific intentionality about my own life experience, which was one that came from the African American experience that embraced al-Islam through paramilitary Black nationalism called the Nation of Islam. And in our pursuit of religion and social change, the idea and the concept and the effort was very much motivated by the fact that we were people who were enslaved in this country. We came here, most of us, vast majority of the people who embraced Islam through these means, through the Nation of Islam, that was not practicing the religion of Islam as known around the world at that time in its inception, in around 1930. But that effort, less than 100 years after being released from being enslaved in this country, and just let go. No food, no debriefing, no
land, no clothing, no culture, no anything. And we were forced to fend. And there was a great stabilizer in the Black church that served our people. But in the 60s, the emergence of self-awareness from the many different movements, including the Black Panthers and including others, mostly stimulated from Marcus Garvey's effort, gave rise to the Nation of Islam, Marcus Garvey's effort, contemporary to, at a point in the 60s, the Black Panthers and others. And these movements ultimately led to a greater sense of identity, greater sense of pride, greater sense of religious identity. And that context is so critical to understand, because it really was the obligation of Muslims who understood al-Islam to bring al-Islam as a concept for the reformation of humanity, for peace, to the people who were enslaved and that were experiencing what we experienced in our history in the United States of America. Conversely, most of the people who had Islam historically around the world and found themselves on the shores of North America came from practices that were generations old. And the background of how they came to embrace and have religion and held religion as an identity was something that was quite separate and maybe not immediately identifiable with the African American pathway to identify as Muslims. And there were beliefs that were different. Paramilitary Black nationalism in the name of Islam didn't automatically meld well with the practice of those who carried on the tradition of Mohammed the Prophet of 1400 years ago. Prayers and peace be upon him. And these concepts that sort of created this divide, they were only exacerbated by the fact that America was, practically racist in practice. There were, we know the history. We know that there were, places for Blacks to go and places for whites to go. There was segregation. We know that there were all sorts in every which way dehumanized, underutilized fairness in policies that were designed to serve America, but disproportionately were meted out in advantage to white America and not those Americans that were of African descent, Black America. And so many of the people who immigrated to America wanted to fit in, wanted to whiten themselves in the language and in the way that they practiced their religion or hid it sometimes, and in the way they related or not to, the black sheep, no pun intended, of America, which was the Africans enslaved in the United States of America. And so for all of these reasons, prior to 9/11, I would say that the condition of Islam in America, with very few exceptions, but there were some exceptions. I think of Mahmoud Kazmi and Suhaib Barzinji and Atifa Saeed and others, who I've known since I was a little boy, 11 years old. And these were the first instances of sort of breaching the bow, making certain that there was work across difference without respect to background. But by and large, that these were rare occurrences. It was rare to see cooperation across difference that did not have a sense of difference. I don't even want to say superiority. There's a big sense of difference in both directions. And I would say further, within the immigrant Muslim community, there may have been a little bit of a naivete that you could embrace America and become white in America, and by extension of that idea, get accepted by the United States of America, and then have your life, even if the proceeds of your means are going back to support somewhere else. 9/11 occurred, and it served as a catalyst for the unity of right-minded Americans. It served as a rallying point for us all to understand that the actions of, the few individuals who were clearly mentally deranged, whoever was involved with that effort, those are people who are not mentally fit for civility. The individuals who were responsible for that were whoever they were. They were people who caused right-minded people to unite across difference and across whatever was their background. And now we start to see, specifically within the Muslim community, unity or efforts toward unity and conversations occurring that have never happened before. We started to see Muslims getting involved in the public life more than ever before in the history of America, running for office on the front lines of the medical workers required to respond and answer this heinous pandemic. We started to see people who would work in every which way to come to know one another better. And I think that's a really positive thing. That was within sort of the intra-Muslim community activity. But it also had, I guess you could call it some negative effects as well, one of which is it uncovered the fact that the vicious parts of America, in not all the way living up to the aspirations of this idea, this experiment called the United States of America, these practices by the status quo, practices by the majority community in the United States of America, that was oftentimes exclusionary, that was oftentimes privileged, that was oftentimes, racist. It reminded people who were not in the target of that racism, the Black community, that they too are not white, are not status quo. They too can become the victims of ignorance, victims of the targets of very heinous and vicious attacks. Again, not an absolute reality of America, but a prevalent part of this country's history. We were able to, external to the Muslim communities, begin processes to have, again, conversations that have never been had as publicly in this country, and maybe never had writ large, where we've been able to work across difference, embrace and have tough conversations, interfaith conversations, intra-faith within the community conversations, and some remarkable results. I think the biggest result, as I close my remarks, would be the multitude of social service organizations that are happening in almost every city at the hands of Muslims. Khidma, or service, is a key tenet of the religion of Al-Islam. And if it's not one that is punctuated as one core tenet that one must learn, it is, in fact, something that permeates every tenet of the implementation of the religion of Al-Islam, a religion of service to God, the religion of peace. It's called the religion of peace. And, out of that, there have been rallying points, efforts like the effort of Farhan Latif at Al-Hibri, efforts like the effort of Jihad Turk with Bayan, efforts on whose board I sit. And I'm happy to sit on his board because for this academic institution, training in the form of a accredited university, graduate students in sciences, mostly devoted to service. We've been able to address the reentry community stronger than ever before. We've been able to address colleges, universities, chaplaincy, not just within Bayan, but I'm speaking of the Muslim community across the country. We've been able to recognize that without having to, put quotations around it or feel weak or poor, because some individuals have that sort of an attitude towards this idea, But we've been able to embrace our rights in this country as we take responsibility for serving the people in this country and the people of the world, in spite of the fact that, $1.2 billion is spent per year on Islamophobia, in spite of the fact that there are restrictions in Kashmir and with Uyghur people, wherever oppression is happening anywhere. The 9/11 has served as a catalyst for right-minded people to come together all over the world, starting in the United States of America, and confront ignorance, stupidity, and oppression anywhere that it exists in the world. And I think that that's a remarkable thing, and I'm happy to be a part of that effort, a part of that movement. And I look forward to the rest of this discussion.
Thank you so much, Imam Safiya. May Allah reward you, and thank you for those very insightful, well-considered comments. And we look forward to further contributions from you during the discussion. Now we'll move on to Dr. Sherman Jackson. Dr. Jackson, I said with no hesitation, as the Muslim...
That's all we need.
Huh? That's all you need, but I didn't even finish the thoughts. I'll finish that thought and then I'll give you the mic. So I was just going to say that I consider you our community's leading public intellectual.
See?
But I think that's very important to say, Dr. Jackson, because there are a lot of people sitting up in the ivory tower perches, and the investment that the community directly or indirectly has made in them has very little return in the community itself. And not only that, I think it really, your work has helped to revive a dying, if not dead, American tradition. Before the 60s, we had the public intellectual was the man. So someone like Daniel Bell, who was the great sociologist, his works were at the highest level. The individuality, the cultural contradictions of capitalism, those are numbered amongst the great intellectual works of the 20th century. But they were written in everyday language that was accessible to the average person. And despite your propensity to make up big words that no one understands, overall, your books are accessible to the overwhelming majority of our community. And that's something that's very important. Thank you for that. I'm not saying nothing else. Tafaddal.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm sorry, could you put it back on a gallery? Because it feels like I'm talking to myself in the mirror when I'm the only one up there. It's sort of a little bit disorienting. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nastahdihi wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina min sayyiati a'malina man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlil fala hadiya lahu wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي وقني شر نفسي وفلك لساني وان اؤذل بغير حق رب العالمين. بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
I'm going to begin my remarks by correcting my dear brother Safiya Rabb. I'm the youngest.
The youngest at heart.
Yes, that was a joke, man. A lot has been said, thus far, and I don't want to be repetitious in what I say. And I also want to apologize for probably driving some of the viewers crazy. I had a lot of difficulty getting this up on my computer, so I was trying to use my phone, and I was just moving around the house trying to, keep the signal whereby I could continue to receive the message. So I apologize about that. Let me start off by saying the following. One of the things that really informs my thinking as I ponder these things is something that Imam Shafi'i once is reported to have said. And he said that if Allah had revealed nothing but Surah Al-Asr, that would have been enough to guide the people. And Surah Al-Asr is a surah that enjoins us to be very forthright in our embrace of the truth. In fact, to face one another and to mutually enjoy one another in truth. And then to have the resilience and the steadfastness to be able to deal with that truth, whatever it is. And if we're able to do that, we can find our way to the kind of guidance that inshallah will render us the community that Allah meant for us to be. And I say that because I think one of the things that we have to bear in mind as a Muslim community in America, and my remarks are going to be limited primarily to 9/11 and the response of the Muslim community in America, and I'm sure that will expand as we get into the question and answer period. But one of the things that I think that we should keep in mind is that, we are still a work in progress in America. And I think that sometimes we lose sight of that. And that sort of drives us to sort of put ourselves in a position where we think we have to have all of the answers ready-made, and that whatever decisions we decide upon, they have to be right and we cannot self-correct. And I think that we have to recognize we're still a work in progress. This is a very difficult terrain, culturally, socio-politically, even economically, for many Muslims to navigate. And therefore, we're not going to always get it right. And when we don't get it right, we have to remember, however, two things. And this is one of the things that I hope 9/11 has not done. Sometimes we can be so afflicted with the situation around us, the Islamophobia, all the things that Sister Nisa talked about, the racism, etc. And all these things have to be addressed. But we have to be careful that in addressing those things on the horizontal plane, we don't lose our vertical gaze. We don't forget that Allah is in charge. We don't forget that our ultimate salvation resides in His pleasure. And we have to remain mindful of that. And as long as we are doing our best sincerely, Allah will help us. We don't have to have it all right all the time. We can come back to each other and say, you know what, that would have been a better way to do it. You know what, that's a good point. Let's change our course and do it a little differently. And if we're not able to do that, then we end up potentially doubling down on things that are ultimately mistakes. All right. And one of the mistakes that I want to avoid, and I think that as a community we should avoid in talking about 9/11, is that, we have to recognize we are a single community. We are the community of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. But we are a community that's made up of several different parts. On 9/11, my daughter is the one who helped me finally get this thing up on my laptop. I mean, I'm a technophobe. But she was about 6 months old on 9/11, right? Some of us weren't even born on 9/11. Some of us had been Muslims for 20 years on 9/11. Some of us were in our 40s. Some of us were in our 50s. Some of us were in our teens, all right? Some of us were Black. Some of us were white. Some of us were immigrants from various countries. And so 9/11 might affect us as a community in one way, but within that community, different members may have reacted and may have been affected in different ways. So for example, Imam Magid talked about how, I think I heard this part correctly, how, some of the school children, were feeling bullied in school after 9/11. And I'm sure that that's a reality that many Muslim children faced in schools. I have a nephew, a young Muslim nephew. He was about 12 or 13 at the time. The first day that schools opened up after 9/11, he went to school with a phone, basically saying, say something, say something. And that's a part of how he indulged his sense of being a Muslim as a Black American Muslim, traditionally part of a community that has itself been a sort of a counter-public, all right? That has always had its critique of the dominant order, right? And so I think that one of the reasons I'm saying is that one of the things that I've discovered is that different Muslims relate to 9/11 in different ways. And one of the mistakes, and I'll say this here, one of the mistakes that I've made sometimes is that I've not been perhaps sufficiently attuned to, sufficiently aware of just how impactful 9/11 was psychologically and emotionally on many of the immigrant brothers and sisters, precisely because it did not affect me that way as a Black American. I mean, as a Black American, there's a real extent to which, I mean, it's just going to be another day at the office. Being a person in society, marginalized, has things stacked against them, has all kinds of presuppositions made about them before they even open their mouths. I mean, these are all normal parts of everyday life. And so I was not affected in that way. And most of the people around me, all right, were not affected that way, certainly within the Black American community. Whereas immigrants saw this and felt this as a real attempt to alienate them from America, right? To make them genuinely feel unwelcome, the go home syndrome, all right? Well, many Black Americans don't go home. We mean Chicago, to Philadelphia. So they don't have that. And so part of what I'm trying to say here is that, we want to be sensitive about the pluralistic nature of our community and how the psychological and emotional landscape may differ depending on who we're talking to and who we're talking about. Because if we're not careful in this regard, we end up talking about the community, but certain members don't see themselves in what we're depicting in terms of the community. And therefore, 9/11 as a topic ends up dividing us even more, saying that those people are really callous. They don't care about us. We're invisible to them, all right? And that's one of the things that we really want to avoid. And so I think that, I hope that one of the things that comes out of 9/11 is that, we find a way to avoid allowing the tragedy of 9/11 to turn us against each other. It's sort of like Allah says in Surah Al-Qalam, when the people are afflicted by the fact that their orchards are destroyed, the first thing they do is what? فَأَقْبَلَ بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ يَتَلَاوَمُونَ. They turn one on the other and begin to blame each other, right? And that becomes a source of division among them. Because part of what 9/11 has really driven home is that we have a rich sort of array of resources within our community. And not only, sort of intellectual and material resources, but we have rich historical resources in our community. And by that, I mean that, let's be honest about something. If I had gotten on the minbar on September 10th, I think September 10th was a Monday, but you get the idea that I'm talking about. What would have been September 5th? Or the Friday before 9/11, put it that way. If I had gotten on the minbar, and mentioned Martin Luther King on the Friday before 9/11, some of the people in the audience may have taken issue with that. After 9/11, however, people within the Muslim community began to understand the value of that entire struggle and that entire critique of a psychological orientation present in America that sought to dehumanize whole groups of people. That became something into which they could tap in. And this is a part of our legacy here as Muslims in America. And the Black American community really does represent that. In a sense, we have within the Muslim community, and I hope people can hear me as a Muslim. You see, when the Prophet ﷺ was in Mecca, and he was being, accosted by Quraysh, and they wanted to kill him, they wanted to bribe him, etc. It was his clan of Bani Hashim, all right, the majority of whom were not Muslims, but saw him as one of their own. They protected him, but not only did he enjoy that protection, all of the Muslims who joined with the Prophet also enjoyed that protection. They didn't feel like, well, this is sort of slighting me because that protection doesn't come from my clan and it comes from Bani Hashim. No, they looked at that as something from which Islam is going to benefit, and therefore we can all embrace it. And I hope that the Muslim community can begin to embrace this historical legacy that we have here as part of what will enrich our Muslim discourse, and not only our Muslim discourse, but our ability to stand on 2 feet and to be the kind of critical voice in America that we need to be. If America, and let me just be blunt here, if America is focused only on overseas Muslims, it can deny to itself all of the evil that it has done in its past. The moment Black Americans are brought back on the scene, it can no longer do that. We don't need America that's empowered to deny the evil that it's capable of. And I'm not saying it's only been capable of evil with regard to Black Americans. We see that in the Muslim world all the time. But in terms of the critical posture, all right, that we can assume here, we already have a platform to stand on. And we should begin to recognize that as something that's shared within the Muslim community, not as something that divides us, right? I think the second thing I want to say is that 9/11, and we heard many of the negative things that 9/11 brought to us, but 9/11 also had I don't want to call it a silver lining, but there were some things we learned from 9/11. 9/11, for example, and I mentioned one example, it really did force us to become a more disciplined community. Before 9/11, we could say all kinds of things, and America was sort of an ideological playground, right? And I'm speaking, some of you might not even know what I'm talking about, but I'm speaking as somebody who goes back to khutbahs that were given in the 1970s, in the 1980s. And some of you who were there know what I'm talking about, right? We could say all kinds of things. 9/11 said, no. You can't do that anymore. You now have to be more disciplined and more measured in what you say. And that has been a good thing for us as a Muslim community, all right? Because as a Muslim community, we should not see America as some sort of scrimmage game, all right? This is the big leagues, and we are playing for all the marbles. And we need to bring to that game the seriousness that will empower us to do what we need to do. The second thing that 9/11 did was that, and again, I wanted to so focus on the fact that, we are still a young Muslim community. I mean, I grew up in Philadelphia. Today, one of, if not the most Muslim city in the country. Certainly one of, if not the most Muslim city in the country. And yet, I did not know any Muslims as a child. This is something that has taken shape in my lifetime. That's how young it is. Saafir, did you hear that? That's how young it is in my lifetime. And so I think that, we have to keep in mind, as we move forward, the necessity of coming together and trying to figure out together what is the best way to proceed. And one of the things that we have to avoid is and this is what I mean by one of the things that 9/11 has brought us. 9/11 has forced us to learn something about America, right? I mean, genuine to learn something about America. And one of the things that we have learned about America is the centrality of race to the American system of identity formation. You cannot do America without race. If race wasn't a part of where you came from, that's fine. Once you come here, it's a part of the landscape that you have to navigate. And I think that Muslims have now begun to learn about race and to learn to come, to terms with the reality of race. And I think that one of the things that, the Muslim community could model, all right, is how to manage a multiracial community, all right, where if he says Allah said X and I don't know what Allah said on that point, and he's white as snow, he's right, I'm wrong, I don't know, that's a slab, all right. We have a leveler, all right, that can level the playing field among us all right. And there's other things that can be said about that, but that's another topic, because I also think that we have to be careful about the way that we sort of wear religious knowledge, as it were. Because the other thing that's happened with 9/11 is that there's been a lot of alienation from religious knowledge, because religious scholars have set themselves up to speak on things that they don't necessarily have the expertise to speak on. All right, and we have not been willing and able to open up and to recognize that there are different expertises that we need to call on for different things. And instead of recognizing that, we've sort of bifurcated. Those guys go over here and those guys go over there, and we end up, without the condominium that we need, right? So that's another thing. The last thing I want to say, because I feel my time is going on, is one of the things that I think we really want to avoid. And we cannot imagine that somehow we are in America as Muslims, but we are somehow not affected by the general social political atmosphere that characterizes America. One of the things that 9/11 did in America, and President George Bush said it out of his mouth, you're either for us or against us. And this for us or against us sort of became a new American creed. And it reduced every public debate to a zero-sum proposition. Either you accept the proposal that I put forth and you are converted to my side, or you reject it, all right? And you are either rejected yourself or silenced. What I'm saying is that 9/11 saw the erosion of the possibility of debate and discourse in America. I mean, look at the invasion of Iraq. Look at how scared even powerful senators were to raise their voice and say, no, this is wrong, right? They could not even oppose it, because we have fallen into a for us or against us, all right? And one of the things that I've seen, and maybe we can talk about this more in the question and answer, one of the things that I've seen is that very mentality has also seeped into the Muslim community. And we have more and more lost our ability to debate and exchange points of view, to recognize, as a Maliki, I don't say the Hanafis are 100% wrong. That's just crazy, all right? Any major decision we have to make is a major decision precisely because it's not clear, precisely because it's complex, precisely because it's nuanced. And we have to have the ability to come together and consider various points of view, instead of being so insecure that I have to shut your view down just to protect my own. I hope that that's not a part of what's happening to the Muslim community, although I see signs of this. I don't think it's too late to reverse that, but I do think that the callousness that has sort of come to characterize America when it comes to debate and public discourse, I hope that we as a Muslim community will be able to find alternatives to that, and get back to who we really are as Muslims. And I'll say this last thing, Imam Zaid, and I'll stop. You know, you talked about a little bit about my scholarship. Let me say what I'm really most committed to. Part of the problem that I see is that we as a Muslim community have been cut off from our own heritage, intellectually speaking. We know who Foucault is, and we know who Kant is, and we know who Derrida is, and we know what structuralism is and all of that. And many of us have never read anything Ghazali said. We've never read anything that Ibn al-Ta'ala said. We don't know our own intellectual tradition, a tradition that was itself committed to normalizing a God-centered life. And so what is really important to me is that we reconnect to that, and that becomes a basis upon which we can enter the fray in America and essentially become, as the Prophet advised us, unsur akhaka zaliman aw mazluman. Of course, help your brother, right or wrong. Help America, right or wrong. How do you help it if it's right? That's clear. How do you help it if it's wrong? You stop it from doing its wrong. And this means that we have to find the voice, we have to find the intellectual heft, we have to be able to change some of the cognitive frames that dominate Americans and even prevent them from being able to give Islam a fair hearing. I mean, that's part of the commitment that we have to have. And then to do that, this is not going to be, you know, a straightforward, easy, uncomplicated a matter. There are going to be mistakes. I'm going to encounter things I don't know. I'm reminded of an old friend of mine, Shahabudin al-Qarafi, and I really will start with this, Imam Zaid. He said, once he was discussing a point, and he said, you know, I don't know the answer to this. And I'm still thinking about it. But but what I said before, it wasn't right. I know that now. But I also know that knowing that something is not right is itself a gift from God and a form of knowledge. And hopefully, as a community, we can begin to benefit from that. There are going to be no easy ipsy-dixit answers. We're going to have to find a way to come together, to become a community of khilaf. I believe that I am right with the possibility that I'm wrong. I believe that you are wrong with the possibility that you are right. And continue to try to work towards that which would make us the community that we should be. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Imam Zaid, I think you're still muted. I think.
Yeah, you see, you're not that politically dinosaur-like, Dr. Jackson. Dr. Yasir, huh? So you knew I was muted. Yeah, Sheikh Yasir. Let me start this discussion by working in a question from one of the viewers, and let me ask someone in the house here to bring me some water, because I'm getting a leg cramp. I get that when I don't drink enough water. So I don't want to be grimacing on the screen. But a questioner asked, and this, well, let me start with something you said, Sheikh Yasir. You mentioned how the messenger, it might not be appropriate for someone like myself or yourself or any of the panelists to say something like, and I'm saying this just factually, that 9/11 has led to 2 disastrous wars that have resulted in the deaths of 1 million Muslims. And I say if 1 million Muslims can be killed anywhere, most of those civilians, and we're not able to speak about it, I think we create a void that's going to be filled by critical race theory. It's going to be filled by desires to find other avenues to express that deep desire for justice. So I think it's very important that we talk about this. And here's where the question comes in. One of the sisters who's viewing was asking, how can we talk about those things without either creating a deep spirit of anti-Americanism in our children, on the one hand. So I'll just start with that. And I think the way that we do it factually with no bitterness, with the desire to help this country heal and be better, because there are millions that Afghanis, Iraqis, Somalis, but this country is dying a spiritual death.
Yes.
As a result of what it's doing.
Jayyid.
If we want to save it, we're going to have to do some truth telling, as my friend Cornel West likes to say that. So, Sheikh Yasir, you start, you bite into that, and everyone jump in.
Jayyid, I think there was a bit of a misunderstanding. Obviously, I myself have been extremely vocal in my own khutab and my own lectures about many of these issues. I actually gave a khutbah recently about this, and I'm going to give another one actually this Friday about the after effects of 9/11. I just gave a talk last month about Afghanistan, and I was very clear that the entire war on terror became a war of terror that was engineered for financial gain. I mean, I was very clear about this. But my point was that not every imam feels comfortable becoming that bitter or that that politically blunt. And understandably, people's tolerance is different. And just like fitna to khalq al-Quran, yani some people caved under, some people use tawdiya. We can't expect every imam or sheikh. So my point was, those that decide to be silent, at least facilitate other voices to be given to your community, right? That's point number one. Point number two, Imam Zaid, let's be brutally honest here. Even you and I have a red line that we're not going to cross. You hinted at some of that stuff in your own muqaddimah, right? We're not going to go down certain things. Why did you say that? Because we are all cognizant that there are a lot of unanswered questions. Let's leave it that way. It's not the best use of my and your acceptability amongst the people to have that tainted or destroyed by going down things that are not the wisest for us to do. The same goes for the more awkward question, which is factually correct, of the causes of the tragedy of 9/11. Now, I've taught an entire 9 years at university. I used to teach a course called Jihad and Fundamentalism, right? That was the title of my course. And in that course, I was able to explain and contextualize and go into detail about where this is coming from and the political motivations. It is well nigh impossible in a 20-minute lecture for the average person in this country to even begin to understand the causes of 9/11. They're not coming out of a vacuum. The minute you begin talking about that, the immediate suspicion is you're justifying and you're contextualizing, right? Sorry, not contextualizing, validating. They don't understand that you're contextualizing in order to avoid a future tragedy.
Yeah,
so that was my point, Sheikhana.
I got you. No, that's very clear. And maybe you could start briefly, and then we could go to others. How do we, either in the context of an academic course, the kind that you alluded to, or in conversations at the dinner table, or in Sunday school classes, how do we talk about some of the less savory aspects of this country's history, whether it's directly related to 9/11, our topic tonight, or other controversial things, without creating a sense of anti-Americanness and divorcing our children from a desire to continue to reference Dr. Jackson, to be continued to be part of that ongoing journey towards that more perfect union.
I'd like to jump in. Yeah. So I will say first that that's a very big question, and I can only speak from the experience of really my father, who, and I'm going to ask everyone on this call, lost his wife last week, and we buried her. We asked everybody to pray for her soul and for his continuity. But I can say, my father is a person who managed to keep me and my siblings very interested in Al-Islam, and avoid having a sense of anti-Americanism about us. And I think that the way it was treated, and it may be wise to adopt it similar to the ways in which we adopted the virtues of practice within the Black community from the Black church, because the Black church had a way of dealing in a way that promoted sanity. and anchoring life, there may be something to reference in what has survived the bad parts to date of America in the Muslim, African American Muslim community, Black American Muslim community. Shout out to Dr. Jackson's book. I would say that, as Dr. Jackson mentioned, that Islam in America is not a baked thing. I don't think he said it like that, but the story is still being written. And on that journey, it's not, as it is not complete, and as we take the best parts of where we have succeeded, you know, America as an experiment itself is not finished being written. And, you know, if we want our rights in this country and are willing to take responsibility, then we have to, you know, avoid demonizing the goal. And if we see it as something that is aspirational, not something that is otherized or owned by someone else, then that may help to not demonize the aspiration itself called America. The other point I'll say is that it is empowering to even think of the worst parts that have been done at the hands of people who've had bad intentions and corrupt hearts within this country and around the world. If we elevate their behavior today, our nation, it becomes quite difficult to not demonize the nation that we're attempting to give our children a stake within. I'll stop there. I hope that the point is, as I cap this off, the point is that we should separate the behavior of people who have gotten what America aspires to be wrong and misrepresented the aspiration of America. We should adopt that position and take our rightful role as leaders within this country through service, competition, and a sense of patriotism.
Yeah, we got you. Let's jump back to Sheikh Yasir. He didn't get to finish his point. So briefly, Sheikh Yasir, if you could.
So there's no cookie cutter solution or answer. It depends on the context and the people and the level of background and education. To be brutally honest, sometimes with some people, that conversation is well nigh impossible. They don't want to hear anything wrong about the policies of this country, and all of us are aware of those types of people. So it really depends on who you're talking to and wisdom and trial and error. Me personally, the way that I begin is by bringing up examples that we would understand. For example, what we might have done, for example, as responses to other tragedies done against us. So, for example, I usually bring up in my classes, or bring up Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for example, right? How do we think that's ethical? Now, we bring up the philosophical justifications of violence and war. And people go back and forth, and was it justified, was it not? And then we say, what would you do if you were on the other side? And we start going back and forth. It's a difficult conversation, and you have to keep on making disclaimers that this is not a justification. It is a contextualization. And then you also make the very important disclaimer. The reason we're having this conversation is so that we prevent this from happening again, that we don't want to provoke people unjustifiably, but it is still a provocation. So it has worked. Alhamdulillah, all the years I taught the class, I never got into trouble with even the students or the administration. It was the most popular class of the department. But it requires a lot of maneuvering and constant validation that, hey, I actually had to say this multiple times. You know, I do love this country. I'm an American, but that doesn't mean I agree with everything. And a part of my patriotism is to correct what I see is incorrect about the lands that we live in. There's trial and error, and it depends on context and the people you're talking to. Allahu A'lam.
Yeah, Jazakallah. Thank Imam Saafir for those comments. I'm going to ask Dr. Jackson a question. After he responds, I'd like to hear other people respond to his response. In a conversation leading up to this discussion this evening, Dr. Jackson, you mentioned something about 9/11 and BS.
Mm-hmm.
And so exactly how does 9/11 relate to BS? We know a lot of things relate to BS, but how does 9/11 relate to BS? And I'd like everyone to listen. I have an idea, sort of a rhetorical question for myself. but I like to hear other people's responses to Dr. Jackson. So, in 3 minutes or less, Dr. Jackson, this
here's the setup. Well, I had some things to say about what Sheikh Yasser said, but let me try.
Well, why don't you do that first?
That's fine. I'll stick with that. I'll stick with that. Look,
but let it flow. Just give us that in 1 minute or less, and then move into my question.
The idea of BS, you know, there's a professor at Princeton, Harry Frankfurt, wrote a book, an entire book called On BS. One of the things that he says is that BS is different from lies. The liar knows the truth, but simply does not want to accept it. The BSer does not care about the truth. The BSer will say, not say, advocate, or suppress whatever he or she feels they must advocate or suppress in order to see his interests served, period. And what I fear now is that, again, look at America post 9/11, all right? There was no debate about going into Iraq. There's no real debate about going to Afghanistan. There's no real debate about Patriot Act. I mean, they couldn't even debate, though. I mean, you know, who could stand up and say, well, no, we don't want to rename French fries, all right? And so, no, I'm very serious about this. And so what we have is that, again, for us or against us leads to a BS society where everything is zero sum. And therefore, debate is completely shut down. And what we end up with is we're very capable of telling the truth about our adversaries, but not about ourselves. And that's no basis for debate. And so what I fear is that America may be on its way to descending into BS society. And what we have to recognize is that we are here as well. And as we are affected by other aspects of the social psychology of the place in which we live, we will be affected by that as well. And I think that that's a very disturbing prospect to think that, well, I mean, if you're wondering about the last 4 years, and I think you know what I'm talking about, I'm not trying to be, but I'm trying to score points for either side, but that's a manifestation of that. And that's a further concretization of that, right? That we are now in a place where facts don't matter, truth does not matter. All that matters is that you support me in what I want to do and that you be against those people who are against me, period. And we can't be that kind of a community. Allah has not given us that's who we're supposed to be. And I think that related to what Sheikh Yasser said, I think that what we're really dealing with regard to, you know, what can be said is, and something we need to think about, is a credibility deficit.
Translate that into layman's terms.
Oh.
A credibility deficit. I'm thinking about my bank account.
Oh, no. Well, Sheikh Yasser, as we enter into the classroom, all we have to begin with is the fact that the students believe that we will tell the truth and present the facts as they are. And the moment we say something that gives them the sense that we're not going to do that, then they won't listen to anything else we say. We have no credibility. And so part of the challenge that we have, all right, is how we establish that credibility. And there may be direct and indirect ways of doing that. And this is part of what I had in mind, you know, when I talked about the fact that we have to change some of these cognitive frames. Right now, the average American can listen to the news all day where the news complains about girls not being able to be educated in Afghanistan, all right? And I think that's a problem. That should be a foregone conclusion. It was my daughter who came and got us on this thing here that we are right now, all right? So women being educated, that's a foregone conclusion, all right? But we can complain about that and yet turn around and have state legislatures say, we are not going to have critical race theory taught in our schools, and not see the double standard, not see the contradiction. I don't think that we want a big risk in pointing these kinds of things out.
Yeah, that's a very good point in terms of credibility gap. But as the country moves from a white majority to a white minority, is credibility with mainstream white American middle class society the only credibility gap we have to worry about? Let me give you an example. In San Jose, many years back, I participated in San Jose. There's a large Vietnamese, a large Japanese community, very large Japanese community that suffered during the internment situation during World War II. But so there was a joint, there was a candlelight march on 9/11 this day, several years ago, from the masjid, SBI Imam Tahir Anwar's masjid, to the Buddhist temple, the Japanese temple. And so it started in the masjid. I was a speaker there, and I said that if we are rightfully concerned about 3,000 Americans who lost their lives on 9/11, but we are not concerned about 300,000 Japanese who lost their lives during the firebombing of Tokyo and the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, then there's something wrong with our humanity. Mm-hmm. And based on that, the Japanese representative came up to me and asked me to be the keynote speaker at their commemoration of the end of internment. So I'm throwing that out there. When we talk about credibility in a pluralistic society, in an increasingly multiracial, multicultural society, how do we begin to strike a balance between being credible? And I know Sheikh Yasir was in Memphis, Tennessee, so I would assume most of his students were white Americans. And credibility with other communities that are becoming increasingly important in this American experiment.
So let me just add a few points here that I think if you look at the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, it's very clear that the first 40 years of his life really were to establish his social credibility. The fact that he ﷺ was so beloved, that he was called a Sadiq and an Amin, that he was known for being, when the famous incident of Iqra took place and he runs back to Khadija, Zammiluni, Zammiluni. Khadija radiallahu anha, what does she say? She describes, it's a resume of who the Prophet is. What is his career up until Iqra comes down, that la wallahi la yukhzik Allahu abda. Allah is never going to cause you to go astray. Why? Because you're kind to your relatives, you're good to the poor, you take care of the orphan. And then there's that phrase there, I love it. وَتُعِينُ عَلَى جَمِيعِ نَوَائِبِ الْحَقِّ. You're involved in every good cause. Look at that beautiful phrase. I can't even list all of your qualities, right? And therefore, when the Prophet stood up on Safa, what did he say? If I'm telling you you're about to be attacked, would you believe me? Yes. That's what you call social credibility. That's what you call acceptance amongst the people. And I'll be the first to say, our communities, my own forefathers and those that came, they did not understand that da'wah was primarily social credibility. They thought that da'wah was publishing books and giving out pamphlets and going door to door and having da'wah stalls. And I went through that phase in my own university days in the early 90s and whatnot, having da'wah stalls and thinking this is da'wah. No, 99% of da'wah is your actions and credibility. 1% is what you speak in that intellectual stuff and the actual verbal da'wah. So I think we have a lot of work to do in our communities, the suburban masajid, about giving back to the countries that have accepted us a generation ago, allowed us to be here, allowed us to achieve whatever we've achieved. We have failed, frankly, in our side of the cities. We have failed to contribute meaningfully. As we're all aware, we raise funds for overseas causes. We can't raise funds for domestic causes. So I think I have a lot of work cut out for us in what we're doing. That's our primary goal, to establish social credibility.
I think for young people, they see it's a BS society. They see the BS in the masjids, and that's why a lot of the masjids don't have young people in them. At Howard University, the majority of the young people that I work with, they are what's called unmosqued. Their mosque is Howard University when they are on campus. When they go back to their cities, they are not a part of a mosque community, because when they try to do that, the mosques have nothing to offer them. The mosques don't have programs for particularly young Black Muslims. And so they are en masse. They see the words that people say. They want them to come. They want them to be involved. But when they go, there's nothing for them. When they go to the masjids, they don't see Black people involved in the leadership and what's happening there, so they don't go. And so they understand that it is a BS society, and that's why they are not involved in what's going on.
Yeah.
تفضل Imam Magid.
I just want to say that in order to understand the how you deal with difficult times and how you love the land you live in, you have to go to the Quran and talk about stories in Quran. One of the fascinating stories, as all of you know, is Surah of Yusuf alayhi salam. I'm very fascinated by this story because the pain Yusuf alayhi salam endured from against his family turned against him, his own family. There has family dynamic there, his own brothers. And then he was sold into slavery. Then he was wrongly put in prison. But yet, when he was asked to interpret the dream that could cause the life of people of Egypt to die, if he doesn't interpret it correctly to them, he interpreted that without even asking to get out of prison. He did not ask for them even to release him from jail. He interpreted the dream, that was it. Then they offered him to become in charge of the land. Now we're talking about credibility. When they offered him the job, he said, I need security clearance. I want you to say that I no longer have committed that crime. I want you to clear my name before I become in charge. Then he asked for clearing his name. But before that, he didn't ask for clearing his name. When they asked him to become in charge, he said, I want to clear my name. That's one story. The second story is context. You have Musa alayhi salam, he know all the texts, know the Sharia, but he has a background that where he have seen injustice happening in Egypt, in his context, therefore it's impacted his emotional, psychological state. He goes to Al-Khidr, and Al-Khidr does things in Musa alayhi salam book. This is injustice. Al-Khidr say, no, there's a context for justice in my country, in my place. And therefore, he contradicted him, saying that you cannot be patient because you know so much and you don't understand the context here. Therefore, it's very important for us when we come as a migrant, I'm talking as an imam, as an immigrant imam, we have to appreciate the African American experience. To appreciate the Imam Warith ad-Din took the risk, rahimahullah, and went into that stage with American flag in his hand. Before any immigrant said anything about America, this and that. He took that risk way before 9/11. He put the American flag in his newspaper because he didn't feel that contradiction. He doesn't have to justify himself. What I was reading the documentary with Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali said, I'm not going to go to war, I'm going to this and that. There's a sense of ownership that you're supposed to take as American Muslims, especially American Muslims, to African American history, especially Black Muslims in this country. But we have to understand there's a Khidr of this land, and there's a Sharia of Musa who come with all the texts in his head, and he did not understand the context. There's no text without context. There's no a blind Islam. We have to have text and context. As my dear brother Silvan Yang, rahimahullah, used to say, text without context is pretext. You know, that's what he used to say. Therefore, that is very important aspect of it. You know, be honest. Final things I want to say. Read the Quran. The Quran, every prophet disagree with his people, but call them my people. Ya qawmi, ya qawmi, ya qawmi, ya qawmi. The sense of belonging is important. My neighbor have to believe that. I'm not going to do this as to be politically correct. I have to do this genuinely. Believe in it. In my neighborhood, in every place I go to. That kind of us versus them, as a Muslim, we don't have that in our mind. Every person, my neighbor, is my people. I have to believe that. Therefore, I just want to contribute to the discussion that's taking place about the perceptions and credibility, social credibility.
Yes, Imam Safiya.
Oh, I just want to mention that, and I don't know, I think we may be getting close to the time of this thing. It's a fascinating discussion. I honestly believe that America and pre and post 9/11 America is something that has, as an idea, great promise, freedom, justice, and equality. But in order for the America to become what this promise suggests, I honestly believe that the presidency and the leadership of the United States of America needs to have a man like Mohammed the Prophet, the prayers and peace be upon him, to fulfill what the promise of what America would like to become. A place that is making promises of freedom, promises of justice, promises of equality to all of its citizens. That's a great, great, beautiful promise. But in order to realize that kind of promise, you have to be willing to look at what's wrong in this country the same way we look at what's wrong in other parts of the world. We have to look in the Black community just like we look in the white community, and we have to look in other parts of the world just as we look at our own nation. I just read a meme on Instagram on someone's page, and it said, if the United States were looking at the United States, it would invade the United States to bring justice to the United States. I mean, because there's some issues in this country, and there's a double standard sometimes that we really have to get honest about. Otherwise, we can expect bad things to occur. We have to look around the world and be sensitive to citizens of the world in the same way we're sensitive to our own desires, our own needs. And I believe that the Muslim community, the community that is up from slavery in this country, the community that is seeking freedom, that is seeking justice, and is seeking equality, that has been attracted to Al-Islam as a way, as a tradition, as a faith, because of the promise that it fulfilled more than the rhetoric of practice in the broader nation of the United States of America. We who embrace this idea and claim Islam as our faith are ready to compete in freedom, in justice, and equality, and ready to compete in leadership to achieve service and realize the promise of what the United States of America is. I don't think it's worth it to highlight incendiary comments, put up or shut up. Yes, there are things that are not true and people are lying, credibility and all. That's true. I think this has just been my experience. And I'll tell a quick, very, 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 very short story. I went with a couple of friends and went and got a little girl, a white girl, who was holed up in a crack house, being held hostage by some people, and they were Black and one was white and some were, from South America. And they were all together, and they had this little white girl in the place. And we went and got her and took her out, put her in our drug treatment program. That, to me, is what we are supposed to do. Stand up for freedom, stand up for justice, stand up for equality, de-emphasize what color accompanies the person. And I think that if we practice this, we will actually attract the support of right-minded people from all neighborhoods, etc. Move the conversation from being an ideologue, move the conversation away from suspicion. Our reputation will precede us, and we will be able to compete in leadership and be like Mohammed the Prophet, who's probably the best example I can think of to lead this country.
Thank you so much.
Two very quick points. I want to make. First of all, I know this is a post 9/11 moment, and you watch TV, and the emotions are high, and it can have a sort of a chilling effect on even your thought process. But I do think that we, as Muslims in America, we have to remember, look, this is a part of the American project. We as Muslims have interests, communal interests of our own. They don't have to be commensurate with what everybody else wants. All they have to be is within the framework of the American project. We're not going to support everybody on what they want to do, and not everybody's going to support us on what we think our interests are. And what we're really trying to commit to is the preservation of an American project where that kind of difference can be negotiated. We don't have to apologize for everything we want as if we can only go along with what the dominant culture wants. We have to be willing to stand up and say, look, this is what we want. There's a political process that empowers us to fight for what we want, and that's what we're going to do along those lines. We might win, we might lose to fight another day, but that's a part of the American project. And I think that we have to be very careful about, this service to society, yes, on one level, but we also have service to ourselves as a community. There are things that we want that are distinct from what other segments of society want. The last thing I'll say is that, Sheikh Yasir, I think that's, your point about what we can and cannot say is pertinent. But I also think that it's equally important for us to think about what we can and cannot say within the Muslim community as well.
Yeah. So while you're chewing on that, let me throw out one last point of discussion. Several of you mentioned that one of the positive aspects of 9/11 has been political involvement. And we see increasingly Muslims are occupying public office, but almost universally, Muslims in public office who are doing some great things, especially in terms of foreign policy, in terms of domestic policy, have almost universally, as I see it, and I'm amenable to being corrected, have adopted a progressive left-wing agenda that advocates for things that that Muslims traditionally have held to be forbidden and or repugnant. And so if that's where it's going, if that's where political involvement is going, and it divorces us from other elements in our society that many Muslims might deem to be more in line with how Muslims have traditionally looked at a lot of social issues, is political involvement and this maturation that we're talking about, is it a positive, good thing for our community?
I think that's one way to look at it on that national level, but I think there's a lot of local level politics that have to be considered as well. In Prince George's County in Maryland, they just got a Black police chief that's Muslim. And the Muslims in that area organized and they voted and they got a Black police chief. And it was because of their political power in that community that they were able to get a Black Muslim police chief, because they had had so much trouble with white police chief, so many Black people arrested, so many Black people would stop and frisk, that the Muslims in that community said, we've had enough. We don't want this. We want somebody that's going to be receptive to the needs of our community. And so the whole national thing is something to be concerned about, but I think there are a lot of local political arenas that have to be taken into consideration, so we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So that's another thing. And his name is Malik Aziz. He's the police chief. He's the new police chief in PG County. He came from Dallas, and the Muslims there are so happy that they were able to organize and get a Black Muslim police chief in PG County.
That's wonderful. But I think if we look at, for example, Minneapolis had a Black police chief when George Floyd was killed and all of that stuff was going down. So I think we have to, as Dr. Jackson said, we have to really focus on not so much on necessarily the color of the skin or even the gender, but on the end result. And so what I'm trying to get at is the end result for Muslims. Women are more compassionate than men. We just need more women prime ministers and presidents. And, Margaret Thatcher throws a big wrench into the gears of that argument. So I think, but I do understand what you're saying, and I appreciate it.
But I think, Imam Zaid, it's partly a function of where we are in our evolutionary development. I think if we're frank about this, one of the reasons that to characterize them in the way that you did, there are more Muslims on the left sort of, more successfully pursuing political careers, is that the religious discourse of the Muslim community has not been very permissive of political participation. And therefore, the people who are most sort of wedded to that religious discourse have felt the most shackled in terms of getting involved in any kind of political involvement, any kind of political activity. And as a result, people who can be just more pragmatic, they have been the ones who have felt freer to get involved in that regard. And that's what we end up with today. And part of, again, this is part of the intellectual work that we have to do. If you're going to get involved in politics, and this is going to be something controversial, maybe we can just end on this. If you're going to be involved in politics, there are going to be compromises to be made. And that's
the nature and essence of politics.
No. But this is my point.
I'm in terms of compromise.
No. But my point is, though, however, is that, and part of it's a matter of literacy. I mean, you're going to get in there. What is the maslaha? What is the maqsad? What is this, that, and the other? People who are not empowered with that, all right, will feel shackled. I just can't get involved, and so they'll avoid the process. People can be more pragmatic. They will get involved, and that's essentially, I think, in most cases, that's what we see. People, the more you are attached to the religious discourse of the Muslim community, the less you feel empowered to be politically active.
I'm going to add something a little bit probably controversial as well, but I firmly believe that it is not wise for the religious leadership, those that are supposed to embody the prophetic values and morality, to get too involved with politics or even with political actors. I believe religious neutrality from politics and an aloofness is actually sunnah. It is actually the prophetic, what he instructed us to do, even in an ideal Islamic land. You don't want to have associations directly with those sources of power, because it is the ulama who keep politics and morality in check. And if ulama enter the abwab al-salatin, metaphorically and literally, then things begin to happen. So we have to be pragmatic here. Would I want my brother or my student or my religious talib al-ilm to become a politician? Frankly, no, because I think it will destroy that person's iman and maybe affect his akhirah. But they're not the ones getting involved in politics. They're going to be community activists that are very for politics. And the question now comes, beggars can't be choosers. We have Muslims in Congress, inshallah, maybe in the Senate one day. If they're benefiting the community from one aspect, should we shut them off because they have moral views or religious views that are against us? Or can we work out a compromise where we tell them, hey, we don't agree with your religious views, with your morality views, and don't preach them to our congregation, but still we thank you for whatever you're doing? That's a difficult question to answer, and I'll leave it to the rest of you to decide.
Yeah, but I think what you're saying. Yeah. And I was just going to say, Sheikh Yasir, I think what you're saying is definitely true, but it's apples and oranges in terms of what Dr. Jackson was saying. In a sense, there's a common point, and I think he's going to elaborate on that right now. But I don't think it can be the two sides of this argument can be juxtapositioned in the way that you just did. But let me let Dr. Jackson respond.
No, very, very briefly, because I think we're already out of time. I mean,
this is.
I mean, Sheikh Yasser. I mean, this is the whole point. I mean, I think that part of this is a matter of the level of literacy that the Muslim community has. All right. The reality is that given the levels of literacy we have, religious literacy we have today, the Prophet himself would have been condemned for half the decisions that he made by this community. That's and so we have to do a better job of that. All right,
the cancel culture would have affected him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for many of the personal things of the seerah.
But that's our job. We have to do a better job raising the levels of literacy within the Muslim community, so that a brother, we don't have any question about his sincerity. He's doing the best he can do. He doesn't control the Congress. Why would we hold him responsible? He has one vote for a vote that a Congress of over 400 people do. He's doing the best that he can. As a Muslim community, we have to learn to understand that. Hopefully we will have people who are more religiously literate so that they know what the masalih of the community, what the mafasid of the community, indeed of the society are. So that can inform their decisions, as opposed to being just swept up in that which it's the course of least resistance, because the zeitgeist of society is going in that direction anyway, and that's what we find often. Muslims end up supporting.
By the way, I just want to say,
that's your closing remark. 1 second, Imam Magid. We're gonna run through it. That's Sheikh Yasir's last comment, Dr. Jackson's last comment. And so in response to that, or anything you want to say, Imam Safiya, Dr. Nisa, and then Imam Magid, then we're out, inshallah.
I will say thank you for having this wonderful forum on this anniversary. We definitely need to keep public forums like this one alive, and help cure and correct the problems that that people are adopting about our way of life. I think that I don't want to go as vehemently and contradictory into what's evoked in me over some of the last comments that I heard, but I will say this: I believe that the tradition of Al-Islam involves engagement in the public life. It doesn't involve backwardness. It doesn't involve withdrawal. It doesn't involve being so high, so mighty, so disconnected, so pure that we will lose ourselves. And there may be even an element of hypocrisy that we should avoid if we state we ought to enjoy the benefits of America, but not engage in it in a way that changes the parts that are wrong. I think that this is the journey that we're on, and I am delighted to be in this journey with everybody on this call. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to the next one.
And Saafir, on that note, I encourage you to run for Congress again, because we need you on the Hill.
Well, Imam Zaid, I hope that everybody.
I'm a follower of Sheikh Yasir Qadhi.
This is a conversation, and I hope that we will come out of these kinds of things. There are various and sundry, inclinations, and we don't have to have this zero sum. Sheikh Yasir is right or Sheikh Yasir is wrong. Sheikh Yasir has a position, somebody else has a position.
Exactly. Yeah. Totally fine with that. Yeah.
Get the best we can get out of that. We have to stop this fractious, zero sum kind of.
Some diversity is good.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And now Dr. Nisa is going to add some more diversity.
Yes. Jazakallah, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this awesome body of thoughts. And just to remind you that our young people are looking for us for guidance and direction. And just thank you so much for getting the opportunity. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam. And so, Imam Magid, I hope you remembered the point you were trying to make before I unceremoniously cut you off.
I just want to say this. This has been very wonderful discussions. It's not a kumbaya discussions, which is I see the disagreement on this. I happen to believe that every imam in America has to be ready to be engaging with government. Every imam, because the pastor are, the rabbi they are, and the imam have to be trained in some level. And if they need help from their community, local community, need to do so. Therefore, I do believe in that 100% myself. But I just want to say that really I appreciate Mana and Imam Zaid for creating a platform as safe discussions. I agree with Dr. Jackson and everyone. You don't have to agree in everything. That's what it meant to be. Like, we have to disagree as a point of view. I have text support my view. We have text support your view. Imam Shafi'i said, my opinion is right with the possibility to be wrong, and the opinion of the other is wrong with possibility to be right. That's what it is. But I really appreciate this very genuine and open discussions, and inshallah, I hope that we'll do something like this again.
Yeah, and so on that note, I'd like to say that I really found this extremely beneficial myself, listening to the various views, because all of us, and I will put myself at the head of the line, can be sometimes too overly wedded to our own opinions and our own views in matters that are amenable to different opinions. Like, these aren't any thing, it's ijma'at that prayer, number of rakats, etc., etc. Or as Dr. Jackson likes to frame it, the issues we're discussing, they're not checkers, they're chess. And there are a lot more players involved. There are a lot more possibilities involved, and there's a wider range of moves that can be made as opposed to checkers. You're extremely limited in the types of moves you can make. So may Allah Ta'ala bless all of you for being open and honest, and may Allah Ta'ala bless all of you for really thinking before speaking. You know, there were very few just overly emotional, ill-considered remarks, and we appreciate that. We also appreciate a very large and very wonderful audience. I tried to work some of the questions you had into the ones I was asking to the panelists, but we really appreciate your patience because we did go over the time a little bit. But I appreciated everything personally, and I think even the additional time that was taken by the panelists was good time, and it didn't bore anyone, and so it didn't cause a massive drop off from the audience. So again, we thank this wonderful panel, Dr. Jackson, Dr. Yasir, Dr. Nisa, Imam Safiya Rabb, and Imam Magid for your contributions and for your willingness to contribute at very short notice. So in the future, we'll try to give you a little more notice so you can put even more thought into your very thoughtful comments. May Allah reward all of you. Keep doing what you're doing and always try to do more and better. So may Allah bless all of you. Assalamu alaikum. Our wonderful audience. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let's end with a prayer. And as I think whoever referenced that quote of Imam Shafi, Surah Asr, is very, very important. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wal asr. إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. السلام عليكم.
السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. جزاكم الله خير.
الله وبركاته.